We're exploring interesting ways to grow good things to eat, back in 30 seconds for some ideas that might just work in your garden. Over the past 20 years as a garden designer, I've enjoyed helping homeowners create private sanctuaries full of beauty and wonder. I find each garden to be a fresh opportunity to explore ways to create uniquely personal spaces. These are just a few of the gardens I've helped to transform into garden homes. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to the Garden Home. You know, if you love fresh food like I do, well, this is the place to be. It doesn't get much fresher than this. Garden fresh produce. You know, so many people have become interested in growing some of their own vegetables. And you don't have to have a huge tract of land to do this. You can grow them in a small container. What we're going to talk about today is how to grow some of your own vegetables. Now, certainly there are challenges, but those challenges are far outweighed by the rewards. Today we'll take a look at gardening in raised beds, like I have here. Everything from building them and preparing the soil to some of my favorite veggies to grow spring to fall. And out at the Garden Home Project, sparks are flying. And actually that's a good thing. A welder has put the finishing touches on these arches, and they're going to be brought into the garden to support a special type of fruit tree. A little later in the show, I want to share a recipe with you that takes the bounty of the harvest indoors. But first, let's head off to Tennessee to take a look at those special trees for the new garden. Several years ago, I took a trip to Virginia to visit Mount Vernon and really enjoyed the gardens there. You know, George Washington's passion for gardening has always been an inspiration for me. And many of the designs that I'm using on my new garden home sprang from Washington's own ideas. As the new garden home develops, you'll see that, like Mount Vernon, I plan for this project to be a ferme ornée, or ornamental farm. You know, I've always coveted those espaliered apple and pear trees at Mount Vernon, so I made sure to incorporate some into the landscape plan at the Garden Home Retreat. I have to say, what I appreciate the most about espaliered fruit trees, like these seen at the Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina, is that they are both beautiful and useful, which is the embodiment of this idea of the ferme ornée, or ornamental farm. I was walking through the Nashville Antique and Garden Show when I came across a fantastic dome shape made from pear trees. It was unbelievable and made quite an impression on me. So I wrote down the name of the nursery, River Road Farms, and well, the rest is history.
The espalier tree is a wonderfully versatile tree and group of trees. You can create enclosures such as the garden wall that we have here that's made out of a Belgian fence. You can also train them over forms and create living arbors that you can walk through. You can extend those into tunnels. So if you want a 50-foot tunnel of living architecture, including the fruit that you can have and flowers all around you, you can take the horizontal cordons and you can use those to create fences around vegetable gardens, herb gardens, or other appropriate places in your landscape. Any tree can be trained into a form. When you think about training an espalier tree for your garden, there are some suggestions I'd like to make. Number one is you need to decide what the shape, height, and width of your espalier tree is going to be. Number two, you need to analyze location. It needs to be planted in a healthy environment where you get ample sunshine. The soil needs to be well drained. You need to be concerned about water, and you need to be concerned about food, which is your fertilizers. We train in the classic European style, which includes the candelabra shape, the horizontal cordon, the fan, the arbors and tunnels, and Belgian fence. If you have another shape in mind, go to your location that you're going to train your tree in, and you need to tape out the shape, the height and the width. The next thing is you need to put a wire training system in place using 12 gauge wire that essentially outlines the pattern of your tree. Then of course the next thing is to train it. You cut the tree down to the lowest point of where your wire system is. And you then begin to allow the buds that are in that small trunk to begin to grow out and follow the pattern on the wall. You pick the plant, you decide what purpose that you want the tree to serve, and train it to that form. And you will end up with a spectacular end result. Living architecture in your garden. What in the world could be better than that?
In my new garden home, I plan to use some espaliered pear trees from Pear on arches, creating a covered walkway. I always find this device to add a bit of mystery to a garden. Like the Hemlock Walk at Old Westbury Gardens on Long Island. You see, mystery is a great element of design to add to any garden. Now, to prepare for those fruit trees coming from Pear, I needed to take care of a few things. First, having the arches made. I consulted with a local ironmonger who helped to construct these frames to my exact specifications. They're 10 feet across, so there's plenty of room for walking under them. And the archway will be 40 feet long when all of the pieces are in place. Now next, we turn our attention to the soil. It has been said that dog is man's best friend. Well, it could be said that the cow is the gardener's best friend. This land where we're building my new garden home was once a cow pasture. It was a dairy farm. And in just a few minutes, we're going to show you why I'm thankful for their generosity, so to speak. As you can see, the hole just keeps getting a little deeper each day. What we're doing here is we're creating a basement. And we've created quite a mess, but you know, as the old saying goes, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Now, this gives us a great opportunity to look at the soil profile. Let me show you what I mean. Just take a look up here. You can see the turf at the top, but from that point to about 12 inches down, look at that great topsoil. That'll grow anything. Now, below that, you can see we're into some really heavy red clay. And just below that band, you can see the clay is already beginning to blend with this blonde color, which represents the sandstone. See how it breaks apart? And then below that, well, we're getting into sandstone, and this is causing some problems. It's taking time to dig it out. So you may be wondering, why is it so important to know your soil's makeup and chemistry? Well, growing flowers, vegetables, or even lawns successfully begins with the soil. Understanding its composition can help you determine whether or not you need to make any changes. Testing your soil is very simple to do. You see, these kits are available everywhere, including online, but there are a few things you'll want to know. First, take several small samples from various places in the area you're considering. These samples should be taken at a depth of about 4 inches, and a cup or so from each one is about right. Just collect it in a bucket. Now, the soil should be moist, but not full of water. Now it's ready to be sent off for analysis. But what exactly can these test results tell you? Well, they can indicate the soil pH. It can also tell you the amount of minerals and the levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the most essential elements for plants. And many reports will make recommendations on the amounts and blends of fertilizers to be applied. A soil test may not tell you everything you need to know about your soil, even though all the nutrients may be in place. You see, texture is also important. That's why I'm always working in as much humus as I can. You see, I like my soil rich and loose. Okay, now let's get back to those espaliered trees at the garden home. We prepared the soil for the pears, and what I did is I took 50% existing soil and mixed it with a good source of humus in the form of some organic matter. And then I added some mycorrhizae. You see, this is a fungus that helps create a wonderful environment in the soil for feeder roots. Now, we can't forget about moisture. We added into the soil supplement a water-retentive polymer, and this will help retain moisture around those feeder roots, again, making it the perfect environment for growth. Now, creating the arches themselves was really no simple task. You see, we started with the vertical hoops or arches being mounted on plates that were secured by a concrete footing. Now, once these vertical elements were in place, we applied the horizontal rods that connected each hoop one to the other. Once those were in place, we painted it a beautiful shade of moss green. Now, I chose this color because I thought it would be a good contrasting color to the gray stems of the pears. Now, to move the plants in place, we were very careful to make sure that the horizontal limbs of the pears lined up with the horizontal rods on the hoops. And then I used a plant stretch tie to hold the limbs in place. Well, here we are a few months later, and you can see the pears are really doing well. Now, that's in part due to the fact that we've kept the soil consistently moist with these water bags. You see, you just hook the hose up to them, fill them up, and they slowly drip water around the base of newly planted shrubs and trees. All right, I'm excited about the fact that we actually have a few pears on these trees. I think that's pretty good for our first year. Now, speaking of fruit, let's step over into the vegetable garden and take a look at the raised beds. It's looking good, guys. Organic, organic, organic. I can't emphasize it enough. And that's what this vegetable garden is all about here at the Garden Home. You see, not only is the soil here organic, but the methods we use to take care of the plants, as well as the materials I'm using. For instance, with these raised beds, we're using cedar because it is organic. Now, I've been raising vegetables in raised beds for a long time. I love it because it helps me to organize the space with these geometric patterns. The other thing that's great about it is since the soil is above ground in the raised bed, the soil warms in the spring earlier, which allows you to get a jump on the season. Now, the construction of these beds couldn't be simpler. I'm using 2x6 wood, and I've mitered the ends so that they go together nicely like this. And then I'm taking wood screws, 2-inch wood screws, and connecting them here and here and here and here. And then they're mounted on the ground with some stakes to keep them level. Once they're in place, we'll just fill it up with some good organic soil. Now, these beds will rest in the soil like this, and because they're made of rot-resistant cedar, they'll be here for years and years. Now, I considered using some other wood, such as cypress or redwood, and I also thought about treated timbers, but since this is a vegetable garden and I wanted to keep things chemical-free, well, I chose the red cedar. Remember, organic, organic, organic. Now, what finally sold me on cedar was a visit to the International Builders Show in Orlando, where I was able to study this wood up close and learn more about how it's harvested. Since Western red cedar is a natural product, it blends so beautifully in the landscape. I love the way it ages. It turns a beautiful sort of silvery gray color.
Yes, it does. And you can certainly let it do that, and it'll last a long time. If you want to preserve the natural look, then you can apply a stain that will provide protection against the ultraviolet rays of the sun and against moisture absorption.
Now, Paul, what about ground contact with cedar?
It's a good idea in the area where it's in close proximity to the ground to provide additional water repellency. So we recommend that you treat the areas closest to ground contact with a water repellent preservative of some sort, 6 inches above the ground to 6 inches below. It's also a good idea with a post to set it on a base stone and set it in gravel to help it lose moisture.
You know, Paul, we're all concerned about the planet and using renewable resources. And I think that these wood products, these natural wood products, are a perfect fit because they are sustainable.
Absolutely. Western red cedar is an environmentally friendly product. Wood products are the greenest building material that you can get today. Western red cedar comes from forests managed on a sustainable yield basis. Many of the forests have been third parties independently certified as being responsibly and sustainably managed. And one of the things that people don't take into account when they're thinking about building green is the amount of energy that's consumed by the products that they're using. Wood products consume a lot less energy when they're being manufactured than do some of these supposed composite products.
I think we're taught in school that trees are good and you shouldn't cut trees down.
There certainly is that mentality, and I certainly appreciate that, but the neat thing is that there are more trees growing in North America today than there were 100 years ago, and we plant between 3 and 7 trees for every tree that's harvested.
Now, I want to point out another advantage to having these raised beds, and that's that you can create your own soil. If you have really poor soil and you're frustrated by it, create some raised beds and then mix your own blend. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm using 1 part existing topsoil, 1 part sand, and 1 part humus, which could be in the form of peat moss, bag topsoil, or even your homemade compost. Now, another thing I like about them is that once I get them in place, they're like little canvases that I get to paint on, well, I should say plant on, in every season. And some of the vegetables that I enjoy in the spring, summer, and fall, well, those are really the paints that I use to paint these pictures. But let's start with spring, with one of my favorites, lettuce. In the past, during the spring, I've sown lettuce seed in waves for continuous crops throughout the cool months, about every 2 weeks. You see, I've become fascinated with this leafy vegetable. I suppose it's because there's so many different varieties to choose from. I like the subtle differences in their flavor. I want to try them all. In fact, this year, I'm going to plant 8 different varieties. Buttercrunch is one of my all-time favorites, and I also enjoy the more heat-resistant red sale, and another one with reddish leaves called red oak leaf. These can all be grown easily from seed, and they'll germinate in just a few days after covering them with only a dusting of soil and a light spray of water and liquid fertilizer. As summer gives way to fall, I like to fill my garden with some cool weather crops like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. To grow broccoli, you need well-drained soils and plenty of organic matter to work into it, like compost or peat moss, and they'll need to be fed with a well-balanced fertilizer. Since these plants have very shallow root systems, mulching them can help hold in moisture as well as keep weeds down. Another way I keep the soil consistently moist is by using these soaker hoses. I like to plant my vegetables in raised bed blocks like this. They're easy to cover if we have a cold snap, and that's always sure to happen. And it also makes it easier to plant them. I've spaced these broccoli plants about 10 to 12 inches apart, so they'll have plenty of room to grow. And for a second crop, I'm going to sow a few broccoli seed. You see, while these germinate, these plants will be maturing, and when they're harvested, the new crop will soon follow. It usually takes about 55 to 65 days to go from young transplants to full-grown plants. Just don't wait too late, because the heads can begin to flower and turn yellow. You know, it's actually the tiny flower bud of broccoli that we taste when we eat it, which, by the way, happens to be one of the best foods for us. After you've gathered up your harvest, bring it indoors to enjoy. After all, eating what you grow is half the fun. When we think of sources of vitamin C, if you're like me, you probably think of your favorite citrus fruits. But broccoli, believe it or not, actually contains more per serving than an orange. In fact, it contains 200% of the recommended daily allowance of C. Many of us have strong opinions about the taste of this vegetable, but like so many of the foods we eat, whether we like it or not can depend on how it's prepared and presented. This recipe is a combination of unique ingredients, and when the broccoli's added, the flavor is sensational. To start, just cut the broccoli into bite-sized pieces, and you'll want to cut enough for about 2 cups. Then remove the peel of an orange with a potato peeler in about 1-inch strips. Next, heat 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil in a skillet. Add the orange peel and about 1/4 cup of nuts, walnuts or pecans, either will do. Sauté all of this for 2 to 3 minutes over a medium heat. Now be careful not to overdo it. You want to cook it just long enough for the orange peel to begin to curl and turn golden. Now I'm ready to add the broccoli, and I'll let it sauté for about 5 minutes. While it's cooking, I add 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of lemon pepper, and about 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. As a final touch, I'll squeeze the juice of the orange over the dish, and now it's ready to serve. Welcome to my design studio. Now today we've got a great looking house. It looks like it might be in the Midwest. It's a craftsman or arts and crafts style house. It's really got a handsome presence to it, don't you think? Now what I like about this house, well, there are actually many things. It's very strong, it sits up high, and I really like the dark stain around the wood. It really sets it off. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to accent this house through the landscape. Now one of the first things I would do is I would try to get some green on the building itself, and we're challenged. You can see here that the concrete, this looks like the driveway runs all along here, back here and along here. So from this point, well, here at least, there's no way to plant anything on the house, but it looks like we could, just based on the shadow of that tree, we could plant maybe an ivy, Boston ivy, which turns a beautiful red color in the fall, could grow up on this side of the house, which would bring a touch of green and of course some great fall color in the autumn. Now, across the front, if we move from the right side of the screen over to the left, what we might do here against the house is do a rose. We could put a trellis you actually wouldn't see. Maybe it's made of metal and painted the same dark brown that might go up here and across like this, where we could grow a beautiful climbing rose. We don't want to block these basement windows. And then accent each side with maybe a yew, a dark evergreen on each side like this, and then maybe one over here to repeat. And here we could come back with some ivy across the front like that, and then across just the front of these windows, this could be an opportunity for some seasonal color. Now, whatever we plant here, we might come back and echo in the containers here on each side of the step. Looks like they've got some great looking ones, but we could add, say, let's say we're going with white or pale pink. We could add the white or pale pink petunias on each side here, the same here, and then on these big brick plinths that accent the entry to the driveway, probably put a low bowl, sort of a taza, just a simple low bowl, which works with the period of this house, and an evergreen could be planted in those, or you could echo the same seasonal color. Now, on this blank wall you see here, I would like to see some sort of cascading plant that would soften that wall. Maybe it's winter jasmine that blooms yellow, or it could be an evergreen. It could be a juniper that would grow over the edge and spill over that wall. Now, let's talk about some trees that would help frame this house. I think on this corner it would be nice to have maybe a weeping tree, like a weeping cherry on the corner. And then if you step out on the street, we've got a bed you can see along here, along the sidewalk. There's a space for planting from here to here. You could go back with the Boston ivy to cover this, or you could go with a low ground cover like they've already started. It looks like they've started with some junipers along the foundation. That's great, but I'd also plant something that would grow against the wall, English ivy or Boston ivy along the wall here, and then just on the upper side of the wall, a low boxwood hedge would create a real sense of enclosure for this little tiny lawn on the inside. Then out here on the street, just on this side, here's the sidewalk here, but we've got a patch of lawn. What I would see is maybe framing this house with some tall columnar trees, like maybe a columnar English oak, maybe one here, and then one over here on the other side of the walk that goes up to the front like this. Then you really begin to frame the view, and then maybe one on this edge of the property here. This will help give you a greater sense of privacy, and it looks like they're using this porch as evidenced by these chairs up there, and by having this layered screen from the street with the tall columnar trees across to the boxwood, and then beyond, you create layers of screening and privacy, making that space even more intimate. Beautiful house, and I think these are some accents that would really help it. Thanks for joining us today as we explored ways to grow food in our gardens. Hope you picked up a few tips on how to prepare the soil and even pick out the right plants. Until next time, from the Garden Home, I'm Alan Smith.